This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a story that, honestly, most of us were taught in school. It's this idea about how reason, grew up in the West.
Right, the simple timeline, that Greek philosophy was sort of the first baby steps of rational thought.
Exactly. And then the Middle Ages were this long, awkward childhood where nothing much happened.
A toddler, basically. And then, boom, the Enlightenment arrives. And reason is finally a grown-up.
It's a neat story. But our source material for today argues that this whole progression, this neat little line, is just fundamentally wrong.
It's more than wrong. It's a complete misreading of what was actually going on. The core argument we're diving into is that Greek reason, or logos, wasn't a baby. It was already incredibly sophisticated, fully formed even.
So the problem in the Middle Ages wasn't immaturity.
Not at all. It was constraint, imprisonment, really. We're going to look at how the great monotheistic traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they saw the power of this fully mature reason and, well, they put it in chains.
Forcing it to work for them.
Forcing it to be a justification engine, not a tool for discovery.
So our mission today is to really unpack that. First, we need to prove that Greek reason was already this complete, powerful force. And then we explore the architecture of the prison that held it captive for a millennium.
Let's start there, because when you actually look at the output of the Greeks, calling it the infancy of philosophy just feels like a deep misunderstanding.
Okay, so where's the proof? What shows us they were operating at a peak level and not just, laying down some basic blocks for later?
Well, you see it on multiple fronts. I mean, just look at Plato. His dialogues, they aren't just chats.
Yeah.
They're demonstrations of dialectic, rigorous argumentation, testing a hypothesis. These are the very same methods we still use today. And then you have the sophists.
Who always get a bad rap.
They do, but they were pushing the boundaries of rhetoric, forcing a hard look at things like ethics and relativism.
So you have these big foundational questions, but also the advanced tools to actually debate them properly?
Exactly. But the real smoking gun for maturity is Aristotle.
Okay.
He didn't just add to the conversation. He built the entire intellectual house. He created the first systemic framework for everything. Scientific methodology, formal logic.
The syllogism,
Metaphysics, biology, ethics, politics. Our sources call this the moment reason began to walk, analyze, and systematize itself. This is not a child learning to count. This was a grand, unified theory of reality.
and maybe the most powerful proof that this system was already, superior is what happened next.
Right.
If the monotheistic world was so dominant intellectually, why did its own system, theology, have to borrow from philosophy? Why did mythos need logos?
That is the ultimate tell, isn't it? It's an admission of intellectual superiority. Christian theology especially had a huge structural problem. The raw material of the Bible, the stories, the letters, the laws, it wasn't enough to build a complete, internally consistent worldview that could compete with Aristotle's cosmos.
They needed better hardware.
Precisely. They went shopping for an architecture. Augustine leaned heavily on Plato. He used Platonic ideas about forms and the good to, define God's perfection.
And then centuries later, Aquinas comes along.
And when the full works of Aristotle are rediscovered in Europe, Thomas Aquinas basically integrates the entire system wholesale.
And this is what we now call scholasticism.
Yes. He takes Aristotle's engine of inquiry and repurposes it. For instance, Aquinas' famous proofs for God's existence, they're almost direct adaptations.
Like the unmoved mover.
The unmoved mover becomes a logical proof for God. Aristotle's logic becomes the official language of theology. The whole process just proves that reason was already the more robust system. It had to be imported to prop up the narrative.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the main conflict. If reason was so mature, why did it give up its freedom? And this brings us to that key insight from the sources. Greek reason was honest, but theology required what they call a systemic ability to pretend to know.
That's it. That's the core tension. Think about the heroes of Greek thought. Their wisdom was based on knowing the limits.
I know that I know nothing.
Socrates, exactly. The whole project was about separating what is certain from what is just a hypothesis. Plato talks about the immortality of the soul, but as a compelling idea to explore, not as a dogmatic fact.
So the system was okay with saying, we don't know for sure. It was comfortable with ambiguity.
Absolutely. The integrity of the search mattered more than a quick answer. Now, contrast that with medieval theology. Theology is what you'd call a conclusion-first system. The answers, God's nature, the Trinity, salvation are already decided by revelation. They are non-negotiable.
So what happens when a rational inquiry bumps up against one of those pre-approved conclusions?
It has to stop. It has to yield. The system of faith cannot tolerate "I don't know" at its core. Any doubt suggests a flaw in the divine truth, and that threatens the whole structure of authority.
So reason's job changed.
Completely. Its sophisticated tools were now forced to work backwards from the answer. It had to use its maturity to, as you said, pretend to know things that are fundamentally unknowable.
That's a huge distinction.
Yeah.
It means the problem wasn't a lack of smarts in the Middle Ages, but a structural ban on intellectual honesty. This must have just crippled things like natural philosophy, what we'd call early science.
Oh, it did. I mean, reason was brilliant at exploring, say, causality or motion, right up until it hit a theological wall.
Right.
The Aristotelian cosmos was a beautiful model, but it had to be, patched and tweaked to fit a literal reading of Genesis. If an observation about the stars contradicted Scripture, well, too bad for the observation. Reason had to find a way to make Scripture right.
So it stopped being a tool for discovery and became a tool for defense.
That's the perfect way to put it. Its job wasn't to find out what is, but to prove what must be. This is why our sources use that powerful metaphor of foot binding.
The foot is fully grown, but it can't walk.
The logical apparatus is all there, fully adult, but its freedom to move, to chase an idea wherever it leads, was completely institutionally suppressed.
Now, we've focused on Christianity, but the sources are clear. This wasn't just a Western thing. This absorption of Greek philosophy happened everywhere.
It was a universal mechanism, yes. Because the source material for all the major monotheisms, the Bible, the Quran, it's all narrative, poetry, or law. None of them show up as a ready-made philosophical system.
They don't arrive with a chapter on metaphysics.
Not at all. So to build a comprehensive worldview, everyone had to import the hardware. And the best hardware on the market was Greek philosophy.
And if we look at Islam, the sources suggest the need for this external logic might have been even stronger just because of the way the Quran is structured.
That's a really interesting point. The Quran, which means the recitation, isn't a linear history or biography. It's a collection of divine speeches, arranged more or less by length. It's incredibly powerful and rhythmic.
But not a systematic treatise.
Right. It's not designed to be a philosophical textbook.
Yeah.
So Islamic theology, the Kalam, had to do a massive amount of work to build a coherent system from it.
And to do that, they turned to
Aristotle. Just like the Christians, scholars like Avicenna and Averroes, they didn't just study Aristotle. They built the entire intellectual edifice of their theology on his logic and metaphysics.
And we see the same thing in Jewish theology with Maimonides.
Exactly the same pattern. Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed is a masterclass in using Aristotelian principles to reconcile religious doctrine with philosophy. The pattern repeats because the problem was the same everywhere. A narrative text that needed a systematic defense.
Okay, which brings us to the deepest question of all. If reason was this powerful, this autonomous force, why did it submit? Why did it obediently comply for 1,000 years?
To answer that, you have to get out of the library and look at the social structure of the time.
It's not just about ideas, it's about power.
It's entirely about power and information. I mean, think about it. Literacy rates were maybe 1 to 5%, if that. The church, or the caliphate, was the only mass media. It controlled education, art, authority, everything.
A total information monoculture.
A total monoculture. And reason, which lived in these tiny, inaccessible groups of scholars, it had no platform to challenge that. Religion offered certainty, security, salvation, a complete package.
And reason starts with doubt.
Which society saw as a dangerous device. It threatened the social order. It threatened salvation. So the culture itself instinctively feared and suppressed it. It preferred certainty over, an honest search for truth.
There's also this idea of a structural trap within monotheism itself.
Yes. By its very nature, a system with one God, one truth, one book. It has no room for a rival truth source. An independent reason is either an enemy to be destroyed or a tool to be absorbed. There's no third option.
So even the philosophers themselves, like Aquinas, they had to comply just to survive.
Of course. To work outside that system meant you were a heretic. It meant banishment, excommunication, or worse. You had to use your genius to build the walls of the prison, to become the intellectual guard dog for the very system that constrained you.
So it's not arrested development, it's structural confinement.
It's a fully mature adult locked in a prison of social necessity.
To really bring this all together, our sources use two brilliant metaphors. Let's unpack the first one. The enchanted prince and the beast.
Right. So in this analogy, the prince is Greek reason. Beautiful, elegant, systematic, the rightful king of knowledge.
And the magic.
The magic is the absolute worldview of monotheism, the spell it casts. And the prison, of course, is the institutional church, the control over all thought.
Which leaves the beast. What's the beast?
The beast is scholasticism. It's what reason becomes under the spell. It's still incredibly powerful. It has all the logical muscle of the prince, but it's been twisted into this monstrous form, forced to serve the institution. It's a guard dog for theology, not its own master. It lost its beauty, its freedom.
That's a great way to put it. And that covers the external forces. But the second metaphor, the elephant and the rope, gets at the internal psychology of why it lasted so long.
This one is maybe even more powerful. So the elephant, that's reason in the High Middle Ages. Once Aristotle is back on the scene, reason is huge and powerful. It has the strength to break any chain.
But it doesn't.
It doesn't, because the rope and the stake are the constraints that were put on it back when it was just a calf back in the early days of the church, when religious authority was absolute and there were no other options.
And the elephant, even though it's now strong enough to just walk away, it believes it can't break the rope. It was conditioned from birth.
Precisely. It's a perfect image for that psychological submission. For centuries, mature reason simply chose not to test the rope. It remembered an authority that it could have easily overthrown.
So the Enlightenment isn't about reason finally growing up.
The Enlightenment is the moment the elephant finally tugs on the rope, realizes its own strength, and just walks away. The spell breaks. The prince wakes up.
This deep dive really has completely reframed the Middle Ages for me. We didn't look at what reason lacked, because it lacked nothing. We looked at what it was forbidden to do.
It was forbidden from being honest about its own limits, and from pursuing truth wherever it might lead.
So the corrected timeline is mature, autonomous reason in Greece.
Followed by a long period of institutional and psychological imprisonment.
And finally, a hard-won reawakening of that autonomy in the modern era.
That's the story the evidence tells.
Which leaves us with a final, and I think pretty provocative thought for you to consider. If the core conflict back then was this tension between reason's honest I don't know and theology's need for absolute certainty, well, we should probably look at our own intellectual landscape. How should we view modern scientific or philosophical systems that sometimes claim to have an explanation for everything, from consciousness to the origins of the cosmos? In our own modern demand for certainty, are any of these systems in danger of creating their own kind of pretending to know, just to secure their own authority? Where for you is the modern-day rope and stake?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.